I'm going to talk something about human rights in themselves. Human rights, duties, obligations, and this sort of thing. You see, because all deontological ethics, all forms of deontological ethics, really have a broad emphasis on human rights, or the existence of obligations that we have toward one another. So if I have a right of something, then that obligates the rest of society to observe that right. So if I have the right to freedom of speech, for example, then the rest of society has the obligation to let me say what I want to say. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to stick around and listen to me. They can certainly leave and relocate and go somewhere else. And so they didn't have to hear me, but they would have to let me say what I wanted to say. So in order to talk about rights, I want to talk first about natural law, because again, with deontological ethics, the understanding is that the universe is a moral place. Therefore, the moral law is found in the world around us. That is sort of a presupposition or assumption that deontological ethics operates under. So in order to talk about natural law, backing up a little bit, in order to talk about natural law, we're going to introduce a man by the name of Thomas Aquinas. Now, Thomas Aquinas was a monk during the 13th century AD, and he was a very intelligent man, but, however, he was a very quiet man. In fact, when he was in seminary, he was known by the moniker the dumb ox, because he just never talked, and he was kind of a big hulking guy, but he never really had much in the way of social interaction. He was always very busy studying and everything, and as it turns out, Thomas Aquinas is a brilliant man. He's an incredibly brilliant theologian. He was a monk of the Dominican version of the. He was a Dominican monk. He was known later in the Catholic Church, and still even today, by the title of Dr. Angelicus. That almost sounds like a superhero, but in all seriousness, he was Dr. Angelicus. He was. It was a title given to him to recognize or to honor the contribution that he made to theology. He was the author of the piece, his masterpiece, which was known as the Summa Theologica, which, by the way, was never finished. He actually, it was a work of such massive scale that he never really completed it. He got to a point in his life where he just ceased to write, and never finishing the Summa Theologica, but it is very comprehensive. It's very detailed. In fact, it is still studied today as a piece of Catholic Roman Catholic doctrine. In fact, many people consider that to be the systematic theology for the Roman Catholic Church. He had a high regard for Aristotle, which was kind of interesting, because up until Aquinas, the vast majority of theologians tended to take a more Platonic view. And there's a difference between Plato and Aristotle. Plato was Aristotle's his tutor, or his teacher, but the two philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, probably at least among the most influential in the world, they basically disagreed on everything. But up until the point of Aquinas, what we find is that most Christian theologians kind of tend toward a Platonic view of the world, the sense that there is a higher heavens, there is a lower earth, all the things on earth derive their worth from heaven and so forth. Whereas Aristotle tended to look at the world around us in order to try to then work his way back to the things that really matter, to the universals. In the way that Aquinas adopts this methodology is that he believes that by looking in the world around us, one can reason their way to God. This becomes a very important part of his theology. And his methodology, as he, in his day and age, sought to engage the world around him. You see, because part of what's going on in history at this time is that there's a great amount of conflict between the Roman Catholic Church and the Muslims who had taken over the Holy Land. And Aquinas is ministering, or he's writing during this time, where the answer, it seems to be, for the fear, from his perspective anyway, for the fear of a Muslim invasion, the answer for most of his contemporaries tended to be, well, then we just need to fight back and kill the Muslims before they kill us. Well, Aquinas had a bit of a more tolerant view, if you will. Not that he agreed with any of their theology, but his way of addressing what many people called the Muslim threat in those days was rather to try and proselytize them. And what that means basically is to try to convert them to his way of thinking, to convert through dialogue, to convert them to his way of thinking through debate, through reasoned arguments, and so forth. But the problem, and Aquinas recognized this, the problem with that is that if a Roman Catholic Christian and a Muslim are talking to one another, then and the Roman Catholic says, you need to believe like I do, well, the Muslim's going to ask, well, who says? How do you know that I have to believe like you do? At which point the Roman Catholic would say, well, because here's what the Bible says, and here's what the Pope says, and here's what the ecumenical councils say, and here's what the church fathers have said. And because of all of this multitudinous witness, this is why you should accept this as an authority by which you should order your life, according to Roman Catholic doctrine. Well, when the Muslim hears that, he's going to kind of scratch his head and say, well, that's all well and good. You've got a lot of people who believe like you do, who are validating it and so forth. But you see, the problem with that, the Muslim would say, is that none of that is really the Word of God. Really, the Word of God is the Quran, and that's my authority, and that's what I live my life by. And by the way, you should do that too. So what happens is that the Roman Catholic and the Muslim would come to an impasse, and each one of them claimed the authority of their own tradition and would not be able to then, on the basis of their tradition, convince the other person to believe like they did. So Aquinas saw this as a significant problem, but he thought that there was a way past it. And according to Aquinas, the way past this was basically, instead of appealing to religious authority, one could simply appeal to the world around yourself, the world in which you live. And if I appeal to the world in which I live, then that's something that I and the Muslim would share, says Aquinas. Therefore, it's not something that either one of us really tends to argue about. But if I appeal to them on the basis of looking around into the world around me, then I might be able to convince them that my God is the one who is real, and then we can go back to the religious authorities, and I can help them learn how to live and how to be a Christian and so forth. So Aquinas thought that the way to convincing a Muslim of his own faith was not through religious authority. Rather, it was through looking in the world around us and then arguing from that basis. And in pursuit of that, Aquinas develops the concept, what has become known as natural law. Natural law basically is this. A natural law is the idea that there is a moral law that is found in nature that is discoverable by reason. A moral law that is found in nature that is discoverable by reason. Now, there's a moral law. Basically, that is a standard of right and wrong. There is a thou shalt and thou shalt not, right? So this moral law is part of the world around us. It's not just something that exists in our mind, something that exists as a figment of opinion, either individual opinion or corporate opinion. But there actually is a moral law in the universe around us. And so Aquinas taught that this natural law was a moral law that was out there. Now, it is found in nature, and what that intends to imply is that moral law is objective, it is not subjective. That moral law, because it's found in nature, applies to you, applies to me, applies to everyone, every rational creature, every moral being who has ever lived throughout the history of the world. That moral law applies to all people, and it's found in nature. Now, the reason it's important, says Aquinas, that it's found in nature is because nature is something that is available to everyone. Nature is available to me, nature is available to you, nature is available to the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Muslim, and we all live in this world that is described by nature. And so it's something that we can all agree on. It's sort of a common ground on which we all can meet and we can discuss things. And Aquinas believes that in nature, the nature that we share, there is a moral law that is inherent there. Now, there's a moral law, it's found in nature, and it is discoverable by reason. Remember, that's the third part of the definition. The natural law is a moral law that is found in nature that is discoverable by reason. And this is an important point as well. Because if the moral law cannot be discovered simply by using reason, then what that would imply is that a person who does not have direct revelation from God cannot understand what's moral and cannot have a moral compass, because they just simply can't know from one day to the next what's going to be good or bad. But because it is discoverable by reason, Aquinas believes that we don't need access to divine revelation. It might be nice to have it. Certainly it would be nice to have so that we could confirm our suspicion that what we have discovered as moral really is moral. But Aquinas is confident that we can understand morality quite apart from the necessity of any divine revelation. So he believes that this is discoverable by reason. And all rational beings, whether they're Hindu rational people or whether they're Muslim rational people or atheist rational people or Christian rational people, anyone with reason can look into the universe and they can discern the moral law by using this reason. So it's a moral law that is found in nature that is discoverable by reason. Now, there does become a kind of a problem. How exactly do we discern natural law? What part of reason do we use to discern it and so forth? That becomes a bit of a difficulty, and we will see how philosophers have taken this notion of natural law and how they will propose we discover natural law. But before we get there, I do want to say one more. I want to talk about one more issue related to natural law. You see, because if there is a moral law that is found in nature that is discoverable by reason, if there is a natural law, then what that means is that natural law obligates you and me and everybody else to adhere to it. There are a certain series of obligations that go along with the natural law. If the natural law says that it is wrong to kill, then it obligates you and I morally to not kill. If the natural law says that breaking your promises is wrong or bad, then the natural law obligates you and I to keep our promises, to fulfill that which we said we would do. So there are obligations that the law of nature or natural law obligates us to, and that brings us to human rights. And we'll see the connection here in just a moment. But what are human rights? Well, human rights are rights that are possessed by people by virtue of the fact that we are human. Dogs don't have these same rights necessarily. Cats don't have them. Birds don't have them. Fish don't have them. But a human right is a right that is possessed by human beings because just by virtue of the fact that we are humans. Now the question becomes, okay, well, what is a right then? If a human right is a right that we have by virtue of the fact that we're human, then what is a right? What is a right? And Louis Poman gives this definition of what a right is, and I think it's a very good and succinct one, and here it is. A right is a moral claim that you have against others that includes a freedom for yourself. A right is a moral claim that you have against others that includes a freedom for yourself. Now let's break that definition down for just a minute. It's a moral claim that you have against others that includes a freedom for yourself. If I have a right, and I said this earlier in the video, if I have a right, for example, for the freedom of speech, I have the right to expect that my freedom of speech will be respected. What that means is that if I have that right, that obligates everybody around me to recognize that right. My having that right obligates everybody in society to let me say what I want to say. Now, that's an obligation that I put on everybody else. Now, that doesn't mean, as I said before, that doesn't mean that I have to listen, or that you have to listen to what I'm saying. That just simply, I mean, you can walk away, you can leave, you can talk on the phone, you can text or whatever. You don't have to listen to a word I say. But if I have the right to freedom of speech, then you are obligated to let me say what I want to say. Okay, so a human right is a right that is possessed by people by virtue of the fact that we are human. A right is a moral claim that we have on others that includes a freedom or liberty for ourselves. If you think about some of the rights that we have, my mind anyway immediately goes to the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And even there, just right within the First Amendment, you've got a lot, right? You've got the right, you've got the right to believe whatever religion that you want to believe. You have the right to freedom of speech. You have the right to assemble, the freedom of assembly, peaceable assembly. You have the freedom of the press, or the right to report anything that you want to, and so forth. Those are a number of rights that everyone has who is a citizen under the protection of the U.S. Constitution. These are rights that are guaranteed to us. Now, all of those rights obligate people. Think about that. All of those rights obligate people to do something in order to provide us the observance of our rights. For example, the freedom of speech means you have to let me say what I want to say. The freedom of press means that you need to let me write out and distribute whatever I want to write out and distribute. The freedom of association means that so long as I'm not harming anyone, I have the right to peaceably assemble, and so you can't tell me that I can't do that, and so on. And all of these rights that we see in the Bill of Rights, they basically require that we leave each other alone, for lack of a better term. In other words, so I want to say what I want to say. Leave me alone and let me say what I want to say. I want to go hang out with so and so. So I have the right to do that. Let me go hang out with so and so. And so on. We as we get down into the others, there's the right to bear arms. If I want to carry a firearm in order to protect myself, or for whatever reason, then that is a right that I have, and people should leave me alone and let me do that. I have the right to an attorney in case I'm prosecuted, and if I can't afford an attorney, then an attorney will be provided, and so forth. And all of these rights, particularly the ones that we find in the Bill of Rights, are what I would like to call negative rights. Negative, not in the sense that they're somehow bad, but negative rights are what I call leave me alone rights. In other words, to secure these rights, the only obligation that is required out of everybody else is just to simply leave me alone and let me do what I want to do. So long as I'm not hurting anyone, because if I am hurting someone else, I am violating their rights, and I have overstepped the bound of the social contract. I need to have myself reined in. So long as I'm not violating the rights of another, I should be able to do whatever I want to do. That's the idea of negative rights. But those aren't the only kind of rights that we can have or experience. You see, because those rights, negative rights, require everybody to leave me alone while I'm doing whatever it is that I do. There's also a kind of right that is known as a welfare right, or better yet, a positive right. So we've got negative, now we have positive rights. They're also known as welfare rights. And basically, the difference between a negative right and a positive right is that a negative right doesn't require any material investment from anybody else. It doesn't require me to give anything of myself to provide for you. A positive right, however, requires, these are entitlements, for lack of a better term. They're entitlements to material goods and services that require a redistribution of wealth. They are entitlements to material goods and services that require a redistribution of wealth. For example, you hear many people they'll say things like education is a right. Well, is it really? In order for us to educate everybody, what do we have to do? Well, we have to gather a bunch of money. We have to create an institution, an educational institution. We have to pay teachers and administrators in order to educate. So that requires a vast redistribution of wealth from taxpayers to provide services for people who probably could not afford them. Or who may have other priorities and not be willing to afford them. So those are positive rights. Another example of a positive right might be health care. Well, healthcare, people you hear them saying all the time, healthcare is a human right. Well, healthcare is a positive right if it's a right at all. In a positive right, again, if we're going to have healthcare and provide everybody with healthcare, then what we're going to have to do is tax everybody so that we can provide those who are sick with health care. Those who are sick who otherwise probably would not be able to afford it. Those who are sick who wouldn't be able to afford chemotherapy, wouldn't be able to afford various tests and services. Now, instead of charging them for it, we're going to charge everybody for it so that they can get the help that they need. Well, that's all well and good until you're the healthy one who's working overtime so that you can make your ends meet and at the same time pay for everybody else's illnesses. And it particularly is stinging when a lot of those illnesses are derived from lifestyle choices that you might be going out of your way to avoid. So, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't sit around and watch TV as a couch potato all day. I get out, I do exercises so that I can keep myself in shape so that I don't need any health, any doctors or anything like that. And here I am paying premiums for somebody who smokes, who drinks, who just sits around watching TV all day, playing video games, eating Cheetos, and basically killing themselves through their lifestyle choices. So why should I have to pay for that? Why should I have to suffer for their choices? Why should I have to use my hard-earned money and take food out of my pantry and resources out of my bank account in order to pay for someone who really isn't pulling their own weight? So anyway, that's one of the complaints oftentimes that we hear against those who are against the proliferation of positive rights. Because if we think about it, the more positive rights that we grant in society, the less free we will become. Because the more positive rights that we grant in society, the more material investment is required, the more taxes are required, and we end up basically working our lives in order to pay for those positive rights or those entitlements. So we're not working for our own benefit. Now we're working for the benefit of everybody else, and that's basically that basically leads to a sort of socialistic environment. So that's the difference between negative rights and positive rights.